Okay, we're going live. We are live. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Cheeky Natives. I am so excited for today's book and today's guest. I I read this book in like a weekend. That's how great this book was. I needed to know what happened, and so I read it in a weekend. And I'm really excited to welcome onto the Cheeky Natives the author of the Tearoom, Gretchen Haley. Gretchen Haley lives in Johannesburg with her husband and 3 children. Welcome to the Cheeky Natives.
Thank you, Alma. Thank you for having me on your show.
This book was just so awesome. I actually want to read the blurb because I think it's important for us to set the scene. And I
Yeah,
think that
go
it'll
for it.
give people a sense of why I read this book in the time that I did. Tabby Reddy has a plan simmering in his kitchen. Meet Tirapatheegadu Ezekiel Reddy, Tabby for short. Because heaven knows a man called Thirapatheegadu walks a lonely road. Proud proprietor of the tea room in deepest KwaZulu-Natal, he's also a father, a timid dreamer, and the long-suffering husband of hypochondriac Lynette. For years, Tabby has been working on a marvellous plan which involves the objects of his affection. His enigmatic kitchen assistant. In the month before his birthday, the countdown begins. But just as Tabby is set to embark on his dream life, he is delivered a blow which could turn his dream to ashes. Mm. Mm. Gretchen, I think that the characters in this book, in many ways, are quite complex, right? So I want to talk about Tabby as a character, right? Tabby is likable, but he's also quite a frustrating character because you see him almost just stumbling through life. He's deeply unhappy. He isn't treated well, and yet he seems to just go with it because he feels like this is how things are supposed to be. And so, on the one hand, you empathize with Tabby, but you're incredibly frustrated with him as a character. And I want to know why you wrote Tabby in the way that you did.
Hmm. I feel like part of the poignant message, as it were, at the heart of the book is about sort of living in the now, about facing the present. And I feel like for many people, Tubby obviously included, denial appears to be a very comfortable spot, and one can languish there indefinitely. However he chooses to do it, in his case, he deciding, he's making this wonderful plan for his life, but really it's just a form of denial about what's happening in the moment. And so I felt that it was very relatable in that sense, because I have experienced that languishing in a place, or in a situation where I probably should have just faced it head on and then cut loose and run when I could have. Yes.
Speaking of the languishing, I think that where this is most illustrated is in his relationship with his wife. Lynette is a deeply unlikable character. I don't know outside of the pastor. I don't know that there's anyone who's more unlikable than Lynette. Lynette is a hypochondriac. She is manipulative. She is also very abusive in the ways in which she interacts with people that she thinks are beneath her, so to say. Um, and yet there is an empathy that you feel for Lynette as the story progresses, right? Particularly towards the end of the story. And I want to know what you hoped to achieve with writing the character of Lynette in such a flawed but also a very human way.
Uh, um, as Lynette, as with most of the characters that I wrote, there's not anything I hope to achieve as such. I just wanted it to be a true reflection of her, of how she is as a person. Because with her hypochondria and her bigotry and all of those kind of things, she has her own demons as well. So I just wanted her to be sort of rounded in that way, and just authentic. I didn't
Why
have an intention as such. Yeah.
why did Lynette make some of the decisions that she does? Because in the book, I mean, this we can see where Lynette is heading almost, but we hope that
Mm-hmm.
she's not going to land up there, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that there's a commentary there because Lynette makes some really shocking decisions, potentially a little bit more shocking than Tabby, right? Um, not out of character, but just shocking in the way that she moves. And I want to know why. I mean, even in writing the story, why did Lynette make the decisions that she makes? I mean, as you're reading the story, you're just like, don't do it, don't do it. You can see it, you can see it. She does it, and then there's also a chance for reconciliation that gets missed, you know. And for me, that was potentially one of the saddest parts in the book, was that
Mm-hmm.
Lynette was somebody who had really not had the best relationships with people in her life. And where there is an opportunity for reconciliation, it feels like it's just taken away from her too soon. And even unintentionally, because we don't know that she intended for things to end the way that they did.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I think some of the primary things that inform Lynette's behavior is a need for attention. And that's something that was kind of it stems from her childhood, her upbringing. You know, she was the unfavored daughter. So there's that as well. Also, the need to please the public, to put up an appearance, for her home to look a certain way, for her to be perceived a certain way. There's that. And then finally, her perhaps guilt and this quest for redemption, which she felt that the pastor is now going to provide, you know, sort of, yeah, just guilty, I think, just that toxic sort of guilt that leads one to do things like what she did.
I want to talk about family dynamics, right? The family
Mm.
dynamics in this book are particularly striking, and I can't help but feel that you also really highlighted the ways in which people's background and upbringings also completely influence how they turn out as adults, but also their own family dynamics in the relationships that they try to recreate. So, I mean, for reference, you think about how Tubby grew up in this very loving home, and then tried to recreate it even at his own expense, right? So even when
Mm-hmm.
he should have been able to say, this is not working out, let's just call it quits and let's move on, he's
Mm-hmm.
holding on to the ideal of like what he thinks a happy home looks like. And I think there's a commentary around like our ideas of family and our ideas of like the nuclear family as the prototype for what a good and a happy family looks like, even at the expense of ourselves and our own happiness. And I wanted us to talk a little bit about that because that family dynamic was extremely interesting. Tabby often gets to be the good guy, and Lynette is the bad guy, but he also doesn't call her out when she's being particularly problematic towards Nal, for example.
Yes, yes. Um, yes, well, I think you have two. It's difficult when you have a situation where you have someone like Tubby who, you know, wants to look at the world through rose tinted glasses and would prefer not to go there. And then you have someone like Lynette who is constantly looking for attention. I think that, you know, would fester in that environment as it did clearly. And I'm
I
not
wanted
saying
to
any one is more at fault than the other. I'm not saying that Lynette is more at fault or Tubby is, because he admits as well to largely ignoring her, you know, for the
Yeah,
majority of their married life.
I
Yeah.
wanted to speak a little bit about that because I think that there is an idea that like happiness is a lack of confrontation. So happiness looks like this rose, this rose colored life. There is no confrontation. There is none, and yet you do the opposite. So for us in the book, conflict is really where the joy resides, right? So that like people pleasing complacency is the root of so much of the unhappiness in this book, be it Tabby and Lynette's marriage, be it Nal and Mafiga's relationship and her subsequent non-disclosure. But there is a commentary that she make around conflict, and around silence really being enabling, right? Because I think of the people in Lynette's life. Lynette doesn't have good relationships with her neighbors. She's known to just be problematic, and there's just an acceptance of her as just being, you know how she is, right? And I feel like in this book you write against that so visibly.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. What can I say? Uh, yeah. It's again. It's just that. That combination of the denial and the attention. And also, I do believe in the book, as in life, perhaps in general, for many people, you know, we might say yes to an invitation, or to being a part of something that we don't really want to be a part of for politeness sakes. And, uh, and that, just feeds the unhappiness. So what, as you're saying, sometimes the joy resides in the conflict. Sometimes when you do actually say, no, I'd rather not, you'd be better off, for that moment of maybe taking someone aback, you'd be better off in the long run. Do you know what I mean?
Mm. I want to talk about food. Food is a central theme of this book. And I mean, the way that food is written is so descriptive. You can actually see and taste the food. But what's also interesting is when we think about food and cooking, so much of that is also gendered, right? So you think that it would be the wife or the woman in the relationship who's responsible for the cooking and the ensuring that the food is made. And this book sort of turns that on its head. Food is very central to Tabby, and in many ways, Tabby is also the nurturer. And I felt that you were also writing from a place of familiarity in talking about the food. So I wanted to speak a little bit about the centrality of the food in this book as an ode to heritage in many ways in this book, but also to locate and to challenge the reader, around just the gendered roles that we think we have in our homes as well.
Well, firstly, I want to say that I like food, so hence it was part of the story. And just quickly to also say that in lots of parts of KZN, and I've even found here, especially for bigger events, bigger functions, men are the cooks. So it didn't. It wasn't that much of a departure for me in that sense that Tubby is a male. But yes, I think that the food, in fact, the food is sort of an homage to the culture and to KZN, and yeah, just South Africa, that kind of cuisine, which I very much enjoy.
I love that you're saying it's a home. You're paying homage to the culture and the locality of KZN, because you are writing a story that has an Indian South African man as the protagonist and his family, and that speaks to that. And those are not voices that we often hear. And I want to know why it was also important for you to write about these characters, in the location that you wrote them in. So you wrote them in the small KZN town, and there are the happenings of a small town, so we also get a view and a glimpse into the small town. But you also then, in writing the story, bring to life the stories of those people in those kind of small towns that we might often forget about. And so I wanted to know what informed the choice to write about the characters that you did and to tell this particular story.
Um, Honestly, when it comes to sitting down and writing, I don't really have an intention. It just is like fanciful, whimsical, and that is the way it comes to me. And this, of the books I've written, just happens to be in that sort of place, which I think the reason I wrote it is just so familiar. I feel like I
Mm.
know the people. I feel like I know Demodren. I know that guy, and that sort of thing. So yeah, I don't, I didn't sit down with the intention of there's no actual intention. It's just whimsy, it's just fanciful, and then I just let it, you know take a shape from there.
There are some very heavy themes in this book, right? And I think of Yogi, for example, as one of the characters.
Mm,
And I think that you have written about characters who do some things that may be frowned upon, so in Yogi's case, we know that, without giving away too much of the story, we know that Yogi participates in something that I think would be frowned upon. There's a betrayal of sorts that she takes part in two parts of this book, but the one that I
mm,
think is really important, or that stands out, is in the beginning of the book. As we begin to discover her story, we know that there's a betrayal that she takes part in, and then there's a tragedy that follows afterwards, right?
mm.
And I wanted to talk a little bit about Yogi as a character, because she's an enigma in many ways,
Yeah.
but when it comes down to it, Yogi also behaves in ways that are very, very disappointing. And I
Mhm.
wanted to talk about that. Was that informed by her past? Um, was it just a decision to not get involved in the messiness of Tabby's life? I'm very interested in Yogi as a character, because I feel like there is this, like, almost flakiness to her that we see come through at the most pivotal parts, right? So you spend all the time beginning to empathize with Yogi, and you get into the story and you're like, oh, I can't believe this happened to you. And then when Tabby really needs her, she flakes, and you're like, again, you are this person. So I want to speak a little bit about writing people who have complex histories, who also do things that we then disapprove of.
Mm. I think, like Lynette, Yogi is similarly guilt ridden. They're two very different women who behave in very different ways. But I think that a lot of Yogi's actions in the story are definitely informed by the big happening in her life, the changing event. Um, Lynette's manifests differently, but Yogi's is sacrificial. She's going to martyr herself
Hmm.
as a result of it. And I feel like that's what she does. And if she is a martyr, um, at the key moment, particularly knowing what Lynette did. Now, I'm trying not to give things away, but knowing what Lynette ultimately does, she is now sort of going back to that big happening, the betrayal she caused in her life. And I think it's just a trigger. I think she's genuinely just sacrificial. She was going to sacrifice it all. The guilt just got to her.
Speaking about guilt, I think that shame is very central to so many of the happenings that happen in this book, right? Shame is central for why people stay in relationships that no longer serve them. Shame is also central for why people keep the secrets that they do. So shame and the keeping of secrets are deeply interlinked in this book. And I'm very interested in shame as a modality for keeping people in situations that no longer serve them, but also in continuing the status quo, right? Because so many of the things that happen in this book can be directly linked to shame.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I think shame is an incredibly powerful force. It's also a secret. It feels like a secret when you're ashamed of something. It's a lonely feeling as well. And I think that shame, unfortunately, certainly in my case, replays itself. Um, there's flashbacks and these little regrets that just whisper to you all the time. And so that shame, yeah, definitely keeps them stuck in places they needn't be stuck, or makes them flee at the idea of their own joy.
I wanted to also talk, interlinked with the shame, is the relationship between Nal and Mafia, because I think that you address anti-blackness so deeply in the framing of that relationship, right? So Lynette's reaction to Nal and Mafia, without giving away too much, but Lynette's reaction, Lynette's view of their culture, right? So how she even views Mafiga's culture is also very jarring, right? And speaks so much to the anti-blackness, right, that we see often in our communities. And I wanted to speak about why you chose that relationship to be so central in the story, and why that theme was so important for you to write.
Hmm. Look, a disclaimer here, when it comes to race, I do tread quite carefully. What I will say in terms of the storyline is what I love about it is that as much as you have someone like Lynette, who is, is the worst form of, you know, her reaction is the lowest common denominator, but you also get other people who for whom it's absolutely not. um, and I think in the end people are just people, and you can't, paint them in broad strokes at all. Lynette, in the story, when it comes to Mafiga and things, she is in fact the exception.
I love that you're talking about the people who are okay with it, because I think of Dinothrun, right? I'm probably saying his name wrong, but as a
Modern.
character,
Yeah, it's fine.
he is hilarious, right? Because he is considered to be the village drunk. He is considered
Mhm.
to just be somebody that a lot of people think has no value. So people don't attach inherent value to him because of his issues with substance use, right? And yet he turns out to be the character in the book who really holds so much wisdom, who's able to navigate a lot of situations really well, but is also really able to just act as like a bridge between so many different people. And I wanted to speak a little bit about him as a character because I found him to be one of the most endearing characters in the book, right?
Yes, yes, thank you. Just also going back to your previous question, about the racial aspect. One of the aspects that I did intentionally place in the storyline is, in fact, class or caste. I think that plays a large role. Um, and on different spectrums. I mean, you get it for weight, like Tubby and Nell's weight, for example. And I find that class is assessed in a very arbitrary manner. I think literally the four aspects that we are instantly judged on in terms of class is dialect, teeth, nails, and weight. Do you work with your hands? Did you go to a private school, etc., etc., etc.? And so I think these thoughts are very I think it's very interesting, and hence someone like Demodrin would be so easily overlooked as a person of intelligent thought, or his own little philosophies, as it were. I think there is a deeper class aspect to this story, and I love how Demodrin just completely flies in the face of that. As drunk as he is, as wayward a delinquent as he is at his 65 years of age, he's sharp as a whip, and he's got a lot of he's got a lot of good qualities as a person.
I was struck by the role that religion played in this
Mm,
book, Gretchen.
mm,
And there's a commentary that came out of this book regarding religion, because we often think of people who are deeply religious also tend to feel that they're very pious and they can make certain judgments and certain calls on people because they are quite deeply religious and they're observant, right? And yet every problematic character in this book goes to church and is deeply religious, be it the pastor, be it Lynette, you know,
mhm,
they all in one way or another participate in some sort of shocking behavior,
mhm,
and at the center of that is religion. So it is this feeling that you are above certain things. I mean, it's also why, for example, the pastor walks into the space, people ignore their gut feelings,
Mm,
because he's the pastor
mm,
and because he's religious,
mm,
and he's
mm,
then allowed to get away with certain things that ordinarily he may not have, or
mhm,
he may not have even
mhm.
been the pastor. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the role of religion in the story and what the commentary that you're making is.
Yeah. Well, yeah, in terms of that, I thought it's very interesting that you say, that ignoring your gut feeling and things, because discernment, funny enough, is a great aspect of the religion, and yet it's one that is not used much. I am a Christian. I am a devout Christian as well, and I wanted an accurate reflection of some of the things that are happening right now. And if we, continue with the viewpoint that you're not allowed to question it, it's actually very contradictory to even understanding the Bible itself. Because just like you have someone like Lynette and Kenny in the story, you also have other characters like uh, um, Tubby repeatedly speaks about Pastor David, that they had
Yes.
this Pastor David. And so I think it's important for us to know the wolves in sheep's clothing, and all that.
I am interested in the ways in which people in this book unbecome to become, right? So there's a shedding of identity. We see Tabby start out as very timid, as very just, complacent. He's just somebody who allows life to happen to him in many ways. And then there is a happening, towards the end of the book that I didn't think that Tabby would survive, right? Because of the ways in which his
Mm,
character has been shown to be a little bit deficient in terms of courage and bravery. And yet,
mm,
in that unbecoming, he becomes so much more of himself than he's ever been. And I want to talk a little
mm,
bit about that shedding of yourself to become who you really are, because I feel like that was Tabby's journey. So the things that he
mm,
had planned and hoped would help him become, those were cute, but those were not the things that allowed him to become. It was
yeah.
that unbecoming, that having to shed and be honest with your children and be honest with your family and have the whole community know about your shenanigans. That is what allowed him
Mm.
to become.
Yeah. Well, Alma, I have to say, I love how you put that. You put it beautifully that sometimes you have to unbecome to become. And I think also full exposure like that. I mean, in the end, it was total exposure of his plan, of the relationship with his wife, and all that. And sometimes it takes things like that to get us to a place where we say, okay, I'm at a fork in the road here, and so yeah, they unbecome to become, to quote you, Alma. I think that it happens in life as well. I mean, it happens even with aging, dare I say. I mean, I recently had a big birthday, and it feels very different. Those politenesses, those things you put up with, those kind of things, they sort of dissipate over time. And I must say, it's very freeing, and I would imagine that is kind of, as painful as it was for Tubby, or everyone involved, it was emancipating to a certain degree. Yeah.
I think that, in thinking of the emancipation, I think of loss in this book. Loss is a central theme.
Mm,
And I think it's
mm,
easy to think of loss in the physical, because Tabby does lose in the physical, but there is a lot of emotional loss in the book. His children have to lose their idea of who they thought he was, of what they thought of
mm,
their parents' marriage, what they thought of their mother as well. So there is a
mm,
loss in the physical sense, but there's also loss in the emotional sense, right? And people have to grieve a mourning, the mourning of a person who is still around. I think of what Lynette's children must have gone through before, well, after
mm,
that big happening. And I want to talk
mm.
about loss as a theme. I think that loss was so layered in this book that it would be remiss for us not to speak about the different manifestations of loss and how not all loss was actually tragic, right?
Right. Okay. Yeah. Any loss in particular, like?
So I want to speak about the loss of the family units, because I think that in many
Mm,
ways was also quite traumatic for Benji and Nal. So the two, because I mean they then became aware of their father's plans, and Benji has quite strong feelings about that as opposed to
mm,
now. You know, so
mm,
Benji feels very strongly about how his father should navigate that situation, and you can tell that there's a loss even of the idea of who he thinks his father is in how he navigates that situation. And then I think of the physical loss. I mean, Tubby undergoes quite a substantial loss to him, right, and
mm,
to his business, but also to the memory. I think of what Lynette does in the shop to that one prized possession that was there.
mm,
And I think that, you know, that for me, those kind of losses particularly really stood out, because it means for Benji and Tabby, I think about the navigations that adult children have to make with their parents, right? So you begin to see your parents as their own people who have their own flaws,
mm,
who have their own
mhm,
pain, who experience their own disappointments, right? And it means that you have to then shift some of how you imagine the relationship to be. And that for me is particularly interesting, right?
mm, mm. Yes, I think there is the material loss, the physical loss, absolutely. But as I was saying again, with the central theme of, you know, the living in the moment, I think there's also the mental loss in terms of the family unit, in terms of the marriage. The mental loss happens first. I think that's the. I think that's when you know, he also says, you know, he had hoped that it would be like his parents, but he knew from early on it's not going to be this way. And I think it's the process of really facing it, facing the loss, um, that's key.
I wanted to talk a little bit about Nal and her father. I think
Yeah.
Tabby and Nal have such a beautiful relationship, that even in the places where Tabby falters, you know, so when he allows Nal to leave home, even when he falters, there's a coming back, you know. And I think it's so interesting, because these are two people who in the family units Lynette just absolutely cannot stand, right? Nal
Mm,
is like her
mm.
father in many ways.
Yes.
She is not skinny like Lynette. She doesn't look a
Mm,
particular way. There's issues of desirability and what Nal had hoped her daughter would look like or behave like, and she doesn't. But
mm,
Nal and Tabby have such a beautiful father-daughter relationship, and I wanted to talk about that, because I think that relationship is a moment of joy in the book, because we watch the relationship evolve. So there has to be some tag, there has to be a give, there has to be a take, but there also has to be a
mm,
realization from Tabby that Nal is her own person. She can make decisions that
mm.
he may not necessarily agree with.
Hmm. And I think the primary decision she made that he doesn't agree with is to leave teaching, because again it was an idea, and I think that's probably his main problem. Lots and lots of ideas. So the relationship with his children was pivotal, because that was a tangible thing. It wasn't his musings and all that. He was present as a father.
Mm,
He was present. He was there when they had their own little bombshell to drop on him or whatever. It was him who they called. And so I thought that was very important and very special to note that as much as he was in denial in terms of his marriage and things, he was present when it came to
mm.
his children. Hence the ending. Which we can get to whenever you're ready, but hence the ending as it is.
So I found Tabby to be an interesting character as a father. He deeply loves his children, but I also think that he allows certain things to happen to his children that he shouldn't. You know, so I think
Right.
of some of the ways in which Lynette behaves
Lynette. Mm,
towards now, that, you know, there's a scene, there's a scene that stands out, and there's like a physical
mhm,
scene where Lynette becomes physical with now, and
mhm,
Tabby is just rooted there. You know, he doesn't say much, doesn't intervene. There's just a sense of, oh, you know how she is, we'll talk about it later. And
mm,
that struck me quite a lot, because I thought, like, here's this person who deeply loves his children, who's an involved father, and yet can also allow somebody to be so particularly toxic
Mm.
and like just horrible to his children in spaces where he should be able to intervene. So I mean, he even says in the book, if there's anybody who is going to get it from Lynette, it will be now. But we
Mm.
hardly ever see him step in to intervene and say, you can't do this to Nal. Nal is our child. And I
Mm.
mean, out of everybody, he knows the power of favoritism, right? He knows the kind of sadistic things that Lynette has done because she wasn't the favorite. And
Mhm.
sort of to watch him see that being perpetuated and not do anything struck me a little bit, I must say.
Yeah. Well, look, for most of the book, Nell is not really present in the house with the family at large. And then there's, that whole revelation and things like that, which I would say, in Tubby's defense, he was shocked. He was caught completely off guard. And so I think he was just a little bit frozen at that moment. And I also feel like something that he did do with his children, which probably exacerbated the rift between them and Lynette, was that they appeared to have their own little club,
Mm, mm,
in the family, and she was
mm,
not a member of the club. And I think that's what tends to happen, as far as I understand, in situations where there's maybe a more dominating family member, or perhaps more strict, you know, uh,
mm, mm,
then everybody congregates toward the less strict person, or the more
mm,
rational person, and things like that. And very quickly, a little clique can form. And I think that that's largely what happened in their situation. They formed a little clique.
mm. Desirability is something that you speak about in this book, and I think that it's manifest in the physical descriptions of the characters. So Tabby gets called Tabby, which he doesn't like, but it's also based on his appearance.
Yeah.
Nal is not skinny; she's overweight, and her mother
Mm-mm.
has deep feelings about that.
Mm.
And I wanted to talk a little bit about that as a theme, because the way that the characters look comes out quite clearly as being important in the story, and it's important also for the story development. So I was hoping we could just
Mm.
speak a little to that, and why it was important for you to frame the topic of desirability in the way that you did, right? Because you get
Mm.
the sense that Tabby cannot believe that Yogi would even be interested in him because of how he looks, or that Lynette would
Mm.
even be interested in him because of how he looks.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, I think that, you see, my view, um, on beauty. I love, natural beauty. I like, that kind of comeliness. Um, uh, that kind of just bare bones. This is me. This is what I look
Mm,
like.
mm,
I like to eat. Or those kind of things. And I think it kind of gets a bad rep,
mm.
in our social culture and things like that. But I really just wanted to show characters' beauty as I see it, really in that way. I think it's probably just um, me sublimating or something like that. But yeah, that's what I find beautiful, and so I guess it came out like that, in the story. Yeah.
I want to talk about something that I think was really sad in the book. Was there was a prevailing sense of helplessness, right, for a lot of the
Mhm.
characters. So Tabby, we feel like he's not helpless, but he feels that he's helpless. He feels that he has to endure, he has to go through it. I think of his sister particularly, right? So she gets the opportunity
Mm.
to lead her own life, right?
Mm.
But because she's been in this space of like just emotional abuse and this
Mm.
philandering husband, you see so much of her self-confidence has been stripped away. And I thought that it was
Yes.
interesting that you wrote that character in the way
Hmm.
that you did, because on first glance it would be easy to say, oh, she's so silly, why would she not take up the opportunity
Yeah,
to
to be
actually run
independent. Yeah.
to be independent and to run the tea room? But because you had written the backstory so well, it was easy to identify why somebody like her would not feel confident to run the tea room, but also to see why her brother would empathize with her inability to do it.
Yeah. Wow. That's an interesting point, Alma. I think, yeah, again, it speaks to um, how, this rather the devil we know sort of uh, uh, approach that we take. And also um, just the fact that you can stay stuck and just remain there for the longest period of time. They all do it in some way. Almost all the characters in the book kind of they except in the end, right? The son, but but generally everybody just kind of stays where they are. They've made a little spot, and that's where they're going to remain. And I think that we just become very comfortable in our um, however uncomfortable or unhappy the situation is. Sometimes it's just easier, like I said, denial as well is one of the most comfortable states to be in, it would appear.
I think what you did really well with that particular character was to also highlight just the pervasive nature of abuse, right? I think people were having renewed conversations because of shows like Made on Netflix, but in many ways, people often think that abuse is just the physical. So this person beats you, and that's that, and you can just pack up and leave. But there is an ignorance around the emotional aspects of abuse, right? So what does
Mm,
it mean to be in an environment where you're constantly belittled, you're constantly spoken down to? What does that mean for your ability to exit those kinds of spaces? And I think too much of a conversation is often centered around just leave, or you can just get up and
mm,
do something. This is the opportunity to
mm,
be independent. And I think what you did with that character is to highlight how difficult it is, even for women who want to better their environments or who want to leave, right? Because she wanted to better her living circumstances, she wanted to work, she wanted to have some sort of independence, but she couldn't because of all of the backstory, right? And I thought
mm,
that that was really important that it came out in the book in the way that it did, because there was no judgment from Tabby. There was just an understanding
mm,
of, this is who my sister is, this is where she finds herself.
mm, mm. Yeah, and the abuse. I mean, when I think of, for example, if you look at Lynette's backstory, um, there's this insidious thing that happens in her home with the overt favoritism of one child over the other. How do these abuses inform our choices, our decisions, and things like that in life? And I would say yes, it is a form of Stockholm syndrome that VJ, his sister, actually has, because she just decides, oh, these are the cards I've been dealt, and so I'm going to
Hmm.
just leave it at that. Yeah.
I want to talk about this ending. This Gretchen, you know this ending. So I have so
I
many
know,
feelings
Alma.
about I have so many feelings about this ending, because I think so many of us were so invested in Tabby's plan. So you pull the rug from under us at the end, and we just see. I honestly did not think that Lynette would ever gain sight of Tabby's plan, but I guess Tabby also became reckless because he became emboldened. He was
Hmm.
trying this new thing, and I suppose maybe he was the architect of his own misfortune. But I was not prepared for that ending in many ways, because I think we all wanted the happy ending for Tabby. We felt like he was long suffering. But in many ways, the happy ending manifested, it just looked different to what we had imagined. So it was to
Hmm.
see a happy ending, but I think it was a challenge. You challenged our ideas of what a happy
Hmm.
ending would be, because he was really fulfilled at the end. He had fulfilling relationships. He was happy, right?
Hmm.
Even though his grand plan had failed. And I want to talk a little bit about Tabby's ending, but also Lynette's ending, because throughout the book, you just cannot stand Lynette as a person, right? But her
Mm-hmm.
ending is really, really unfortunate. And even towards the end of the book, you start to sympathize with Lynette. There is an opportunity for reconciliation. I think she's always chasing redemption, and even at the end, she doesn't quite get the redemption.
Mm.
Um, but even that, for me, I was like, okay, maybe Lynette's suffering will come to an end. Whatever she's trying to redeem herself for will end. And so I guess I wanted to speak a little to that.
Hmm. Okay, yeah. Well, I think maybe it does catch a bit off guard because he is emboldened, as you say, Alma, toward the end. I
Yeah.
think it was, I think Freud said we are never so bold as when we know we are loved, and I think he was in that little paradise at the time. So there was that. Also, I think that you touched on a key point, which is, well, what is happiness? What is our idea of happiness? What is our idea of redemption? Because for many, I will tell you that what happened to Lynette was redemptive. It was a form of it in some way. And as far as what happens in Tubby, I feel like, and I am a parent as well, I will just say, and I feel like to have his, his children fulfill that
Mm.
is a very beautiful thing. I'm reminded of, I think there's this portion in the Bible where David says, "I wanted to build a temple, but God told him, no, Solomon, your son, is going to build the temple." And I
Mm.
think that at no point, as a parent, would you feel hard done by. I think there would be such joy in the fact that, look, you didn't get to realize it, but your son or your daughter or whatever. So for me, I feel like it's it's a very happy ending. But I know that there are some who really wanted him to ride off into the sunset.
I think though that would have potentially just been a little bit lazy of Tabby, right? I think that Tabby, the running, there's a lot of running in this book. Some of it
Mm,
is not running in the physical, but Tabby's always running from his relationship. He constantly
mm,
avoids Lynette. He constantly ignores her. There is a running. It may not be physical, but there is
mm,
a constant escape from. And in the unbecoming to become, we watch him become himself in the staying, in the rootedness, in the fact that
right.
he cannot run away. So your
Mm,
entire community knows your business, like it's all out there. Your family knows your business. Everybody around you knows you. Even the policeman who's involved knows your business. And so there is this thing that you cannot escape, right?
mm,
Um, and in that lack of escape, it becomes so clear who he is. And so I think that him running off into the sunset would have robbed him of like personal development.
Hmm. Yeah. And I mean, if the core issue is that he's not living in the moment, I don't see how, running off was going to help that, or, help him become whole as a person. And it's so true what you say, Alma, that, everybody's sort of going this way and that way. And I mean, even the name of the town is Usendleleni, which is like, it's
On
on
the
the
way.
way, yeah. So
Something.
but it's strange that what needs to happen is he's got to stay in his little town called on the way. He has got to stay.
Mm.
Yeah, so it's, again, to quote you, it's unbecoming to become.
So I absolutely love this book. I think I could speak about it all day. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Oh,
I think
thank you.
Gretchen
Thank
broke my heart
you.
in some parts, and she
Oh,
redeemed
thank you.
herself towards the end. so
Thank
so in many ways, I think that I was challenged as a reader. I think we often have, potentially we're a little bit like Tabby. We have rose-colored spectacles on, and uh,
you.
and I think that ideas of happiness sometimes are also influenced by that. And so the book was a challenge. What does it mean to have happiness that doesn't involve a happy ending, right?
Mm.
What is joy in the moments where you find yourself, regardless of the circumstance. What does that look like? And I think you
Mm.
asked the reader some really challenging questions with some deeply flawed characters as well, because Tubby is not
Mm.
perfect.
No, no, he's
You
not.
feel sorry for him in some parts, and in some parts you're just like,
Mm.
Tubby, Tubby, Tubby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he can be quite frustrating. He's a lovely man, I mean, generally, but he also he can frustrate you and things like that. So yeah, thank you for saying. I'm
Who
glad
was
you
your most
enjoyed it.
difficult character to write, and why?
I would probably say Yogi. Uh, I think she was so enigmatic, and enigmatic people are unpredictable. Yeah, yeah. So she was unpredictable. You generally have a sense of, how the good guys are going to step up to the plate and how the bad ones are going to do XYZ, but those people in between are very hard to read, and it's hard to decide, what's going to happen. So from that point of view, definitely Yogi would be the difficult one.
And who was your favorite character who stayed with you? Who's the character that still dream about and you're like,
Um, I would have to say Tabby himself.
hmm,
Like I said, when I wrote this book, which was now I think like 12 years ago or something,
oh
like a long
wow,
time. Yeah, a very long time ago. I w- was I was working a 9 to 5 job, and like many people who do that, feeling unfulfilled. I loved to write. I've always loved to write, and it just felt like he was a reflection of myself in some way, of wanting to do better. It's going to be better. In a few years' time, I'm going to have this and I'm going to have that, and always reaching ahead, looking ahead at the future and not doing something about now. Thankfully, I remedied that a lot sooner than he did, I'm happy to say. But it is definitely a reflection of myself, and a time in my life that I'm very pleased is now past. Yeah, so he would be the one for me.
thank you so much, Gretchen. I just want to remind everybody, just give me 1 second, that they can actually get themselves a copy of this book on Loot at a 30% discount. So the book is now selling for 199, which is a 30% discount on Loot, and you'd actually be remiss not to get yourself a copy of the Tea
Thank you.
Room. So
Thank you
once
so
again,
much.
Gretchen, I just want to say thank you for having written such an enjoyable book. The book is deceptively light because you start it and you think, oh, okay, this is going to be. But I think that you covered the themes so deftly and you covered the themes with such vulnerability and sensitivity. I don't think that anybody can read the Tea Room and not just go and think about what sets their soul alight, and what
Mm.
they would be happy to land up in the community newspapers for. So thank you.
Yes. Oh, thank
Thank
you
you
so
once
much.
again, Gretchen.
And thank you, Alma, for having me on your show. It was absolutely lovely chatting to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for watching. We can't wait to see what other books Gretchen will come out with. But please get yourself a
Please.
copy of the Tea Room. Like I said, there's a 30% discount from Loot. And we really look forward to seeing everybody at the next Cheeky Natives event. Bye everyone.
Bye.